My hands started shaking the moment I saw his reflection in the store mirror. Michael Ralph, my ex. The billionaire CEO who wasn't ready to be a father. He was holding a tiny pink sweater with the kind of tenderness I'd only seen him show once before, the night he thought we lost our baby. But we didn't lose her. She was 3 feet behind me, asleep in a stroller, 3 years old and completely unaware that her father was close enough to touch. And the baby clothes in his hands? They weren't for her. That's what broke me. Let me back up. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the kind where exhaustion sits so heavy on your shoulders you forget what it feels like to stand up straight. I'd been awake since 4 a.m. with Deborah, teething pain from her back molars, crying, refusing every comfort I tried to offer. By noon, I was running on black coffee and the kind of determination only mothers understand. I needed clothes for her. The cheap kind, because 3-year-olds destroy everything and grow faster than paychecks stretch. So I found myself in the children's section of Morrison's department store, staring at price tags like they were personally offending me. That's when I saw him, not directly, not at first. His reflection appeared in the mirrored panel along the shelf, tall, sharp-shouldered, wearing that charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than my rent. My breath stopped before my brain could catch up. Michael Ralph. The name alone used to make my heart race. Now it made my chest tighten for entirely different reasons. If you've ever carried a secret so heavy it changed the shape of your life, you already understand what I'm about to tell you. And if you're here because stories about women's impossible choices matter to you, because you believe truth deserves witnesses, you're in the right place. We tell the stories that don't get told at dinner tables, the ones that need to be heard. I froze, my hand still gripping a pack of shirts, my pulse hammering so loud I was sure the entire store could hear it. I turned slightly, just enough to confirm what I already knew. It was him, and he was holding a tiny pink sweater meant for an infant. Michael Ralph, the man who once told me he hated shopping, who complained that department stores made him feel claustrophobic, who sent assistants to buy his own clothes, was standing in the baby aisle. Alone. Inspecting a sweater with the kind of focus I'd only seen him give to quarterly reports. My stomach dropped. Who is that for? The question hit me like cold water. I hadn't allowed myself to think about Michael in months. I'd trained myself to skip past his name in articles, to change the channel when business news mentioned Ralph Industries. I'd built an entire life in the shadows, specifically so I'd never have to answer the question I was suddenly drowning in. Had he moved on? Was there someone else? Another woman? Another chance at the family he said he wasn't ready for when it was me? I should have left. I should have turned my stroller around and walked straight out of that store before he noticed me. But I couldn't move. Because he wasn't just holding one item, he was adding more. A soft cream blanket, tiny socks with little bows on them, a stuffed rabbit, all sized for a newborn. My hands started to shake. Motherhood is full of moments that test you in ways you never imagined. Decisions made alone at 2 a.m., wondering if you're protecting your child or just protecting yourself from pain. If you've ever made a choice you weren't sure was right but knew was necessary, you're not the only one who carried impossible decisions in silence. Deborah stirred in her stroller, her small fist reaching up toward nothing, her mouth forming the shape of a dream. I glanced down at her, at the dark curls that had grown thick and wild, at the shape of her nose, at those eyes that were mercifully closed, but I knew, looked exactly like his. She was 3 years old, 3 years of sleepless nights, doctor's visits, bottles warmed at dawn, moments of pure terror that I was doing everything wrong. 3 years of loving her so much it physically hurt. 3 years of carrying a secret that got heavier every single day. And now, Michael was 10 feet away from us, completely unaware. I took a step back, then another, keeping my body between him and the stroller. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. I moved slowly, carefully, like I was retreating from something dangerous. Because he was dangerous, not because he was cruel, but because if he saw her, if he really looked at Deborah, there wouldn't be a single doubt in his mind. She had his eyes, his chin, that same serious expression even in sleep. I reached the end of the aisle and risked one more glance back. Michael was at the register now, paying for everything. The cashier said something that made him smile. Not the corporate smile I'd seen in interviews, but something softer. Something almost hopeful. My throat tightened. Some secrets don't stay buried when the universe decides it's time for truth. And what I'm about to tell you, about why I hid her, about what happened when he finally found out, that's where this story really begins. If these truths matter to you, if stories about real women facing impossible choices matter, stay with me, because I'm going to need you here for what comes next. I turned away and kept walking, pushing the stroller faster than I should have, my vision blurring as I made it through the automatic doors and into the parking lot. I didn't stop until I reached my car. I stood there, one hand gripping the handle of the stroller, the other pressed against my chest like I could physically hold my heart inside my body. Who were those clothes for? The question wouldn't leave me alone. It followed me as I buckled Deborah into her car seat. It sat in the passenger seat on the drive home. It echoed in my head as I carried her inside and later in the crib I'd assembled by myself 3 years ago. Michael Ralph was buying baby clothes, and I had no idea why. But what I did know, what was keeping me awake that night long after Deborah finally settled, was that seeing him again changed something. Some fragile boundary I'd built between my old life and my new one had cracked. I'd spent 3 years convincing myself I'd made the right choice. That keeping Deborah a secret was protection, not betrayal. That Michael's world was too ruthless, too public, too demanding for a child to grow up in. I'd told myself he'd moved on, that he was fine, that we were both better off this way. But seeing him hold that tiny pink sweater like it mattered, that didn't look like a man who'd moved on. That looked like a man who was missing something he didn't even know he'd lost. And the worst part? I was the reason why. That night, staring at the ceiling while Deborah slept, I couldn't stop seeing that pink sweater in Michael's hands. So let me tell you who Michael Ralph was before he became the man I ran from. Because understanding what we had is the only way you'll understand what I gave up. The hardest relationships to leave aren't the toxic ones. They're the almost right ones. The ones where timing destroyed what devotion couldn't fix. If you've ever loved someone who wasn't wrong for you, just wrong for that moment in your life, this story is going to hurt. But maybe it'll also help you understand your own choices better. That's why we share these stories. I met Michael Ralph 7 years ago at a charity gala I had no business attending. I was there as someone's plus one, wearing a borrowed dress, feeling completely out of place among people who casually discuss summer homes and stock portfolios. Michael was across the room. Not the loudest voice, not the center of attention, but somehow the person everyone's eyes kept drifting toward. He had this presence. Quiet. Controlled. Like he was calculating 3 moves ahead while everyone else was still figuring out the game. When he approached me, I expected arrogance. What I got was curiosity. "You look like you'd rather be anywhere else," he said, handing me a glass of champagne. "That obvious?" I smiled despite myself. "Only to someone who feels the same way." And that's how it started. Not with fireworks, with recognition. We started dating 3 weeks later, and for the first 6 months it felt like I'd found someone who actually saw me. Not the version I presented to the world, but the complicated, uncertain woman underneath. Michael was building Ralph Industries then. Not the empire you read about now. Back then, it was 15-hour days, investor meetings that fell through, prototypes that failed, loans that barely kept the lights on. But he had this vision. This unshakable belief that he was building something that mattered. I loved that about him. The way he refused to settle. The way failure only made him sharper. What I didn't realize was that his ambition had an appetite, and it would eventually swallow everything else whole. The late nights became later. The promises to just one more meeting became patterns. Dinners got canceled. Weekends disappeared. I'd wake up alone more often than not, finding notes on pillows instead of the man I loved. Nobody tells you about loving someone consumed by their dreams. You start making yourself smaller to fit into whatever space they have left. You convince yourself that support means silence. That love means waiting. If you've ever shrunk yourself to accommodate someone else's ambition, you know what that costs. But I stayed. Because when Michael was present, really present, he was everything I wanted. Thoughtful, attentive. The kind of man who remembered the small things, even when his brain was juggling 100 crises. And then I got pregnant. I found out on a Thursday morning. 2 pink lines that appeared so fast I thought the test was broken. I took 3 more, just to be sure. They all said the same thing. I was terrified. And thrilled. And completely unprepared. But underneath all of that, I was hopeful. Maybe this would be the thing that pulled us back together. The reason Michael would finally slow down. The future we'd build that mattered more than quarterly earnings. I waited until that night to tell him. Made his favorite dinner. Rehearsed the words a dozen times in my head. When he finally came home, nearly 10 p.m., tie loosened, exhaustion written into every line of his face. I couldn't wait any longer. Michael, I need to tell you something, I said, my heart hammering against my ribs. He looked up from his phone and I saw him try to focus. Try to be present. I'm pregnant. The silence that followed wasn't long. Maybe 5 seconds. But it felt like watching something shatter in slow motion. His face didn't harden. That would have been easier, somehow. Instead, it went carefully blank. That same expression he wore in boardrooms when he was buying time to think. Are you sure? He asked quietly. I showed him the tests. All 4 of them lined up on the counter like evidence. He stared at them. Then at me. Then back at the tests. This is the moment that changed everything. The moment I learned that love and readiness are not the same thing. If you've ever had someone you love tell you, not now, when your heart was screaming, please, you already know what's coming. This gets harder before it gets better. But that's exactly why these stories need telling. Naomi, Michael said, and his voice cracked just slightly. I love you. You know I do, but... That word. But. It has so much weight when it comes after, I love you. But this is the worst possible timing, he continued, running his hands through his hair. Ralph Industries is at a critical point. We're 3 months away from a merger that could change everything. I'm barely sleeping. He stopped himself, looked at me with something that looked like grief. I can't do this right now. I'm not ready. Michael, timing is never perfect, I said, my voice shaking. We'll figure it out. People do this all the time. I'm not people, Naomi. I have investors, employees, responsibilities that... And what about responsibility to us? To this? I gestured between us, then down at my stomach. The look on his face then, I'll never forget it. It wasn't anger, it was fear. Pure, undiluted fear. I can't be a father right now, he said. I can't give a child what they deserve. I can't give you what you deserve, not like this. Not when everything I've built is this close to either succeeding or collapsing. So what are you saying? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The silence said it all. I won't take you through the weeks that followed. The arguments that went in circles. The tears I cried in empty rooms. The way Michael tried to be supportive while making it clear his answer hadn't changed. And then, 8 weeks into the pregnancy, I started bleeding. The hospital, the urgent care, the doctor's careful face as she did the ultrasound. It all blurred together. I remember Michael's hand in mine, squeezing too tight. I remember the way his whole body went rigid when the doctor said, I'm so sorry. They told us I'd miscarried, that these things happen, that it wasn't anyone's fault. Michael broke down in a way I'd never seen. Guilt and grief wrapped so tightly together I couldn't tell which was destroying him more. We tried to recover after that. We really did. But some losses create distance that no amount of love can cross. 3 months later, we ended things. Quietly, painfully. With the kind of tenderness that somehow makes goodbye even worse. He went back to building his empire, and I started trying to build a life without him in it. Except here's what nobody knew. The doctors were wrong. 3 weeks after that hospital visit, I went to a different doctor for persistent nausea. Routine check. Nothing urgent. She did another ultrasound. And there she was. Still there. Still growing. Still fighting. The first doctor had missed her. A positioning issue. An error. A miracle, depending on how you looked at it. I sat in that exam room, staring at the screen, listening to a heartbeat that shouldn't exist, and I had a choice to make. I could tell Michael, give him a second chance at fatherhood, risk bringing a child into his world of pressure and scrutiny and impossible demands. Or I could disappear. I thought about the fear in his eyes when I first told him I was pregnant. The relief mixed with guilt when he thought we'd lost her. The way he'd thrown himself back into work like a man escaping something. And I made my choice. I didn't tell him. I moved 3 hours away, changed my phone number, blocked his email, told everyone we'd mutually decided to move on. You might think I was wrong, that I stole his chance to be a father, that I had no right to make that decision alone. And maybe you're right. But here's what I knew then. Michael Ralph wasn't ready. And forcing fatherhood on someone who wasn't ready wasn't love. It was cruelty to everyone involved, especially the child. Deborah was born on a rainy November morning, 6 weeks early and smaller than she should have been. They laid her on my chest, this tiny, furious creature with a cry that sounded like she was mad at the world for making her arrive before she was ready. She had dark hair, Michael's chin. And when she finally opened her eyes days later, I saw him staring back at me. "You're going to be so loved," I whispered to her in that hospital room, "just the two of us against the world. I promise you that. You're going to be protected. You're going to be safe. And you're never going to feel like you weren't enough." That was my vow, to give her a life where she didn't have to compete with empires for attention, where she wasn't photographed or scrutinized or treated like an obligation that arrived at the wrong time. I convinced myself that hiding her from Michael was the most loving thing I could do, for both of them. And for 3 years I believed it. Until that Tuesday afternoon in the baby aisle proved that some truths refuse to stay buried. The thing about starting over is that nobody tells you how exhausting it is to pretend you're fine. I moved to Riverside 3 weeks after Deborah was born. A town small enough that nobody asked too many questions, but big enough that a single mother didn't stand out. I found a 1-bedroom apartment above a bakery, cheap rent in exchange for tolerating the 4 a.m. sound of ovens firing up and the constant smell of rising dough. Deborah and I made it work. The first year was survival in its purest form. I took a remote job doing medical billing, the kind of work that paid just enough to keep the lights on but never enough to feel secure. My days blurred into a rhythm of feeding schedules, diaper changes, invoice processing, and the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that makes you forget what rest feels like. But I wasn't completely alone. Ellis found me 2 months after I moved. She'd been my college roommate, the kind of friend who could read silence better than most people read words. She showed up at my door unannounced, took one look at me holding Deborah and said, "So we're doing this, huh?" I nodded, tears already falling. "Okay then," she said, walking past me into the apartment. "First rule, you're allowed to ask for help. Second rule, I'm not going anywhere." Women like Ellis are why any of us survive the impossible seasons. The ones who show up without being asked, who don't need the full story to offer the full support. If you've been that friend, or had that friend, you know what I mean. Ellis became my lifeline. She watched Deborah when I had meetings I couldn't miss. She brought groceries when my bank account looked too scary to face. She never once asked about Michael, even though I could see the questions in her eyes. Amanda came later, a neighbor in the building with twins of her own, and a knowing smile that said she understood the chaos. We traded babysitting, swapped baby clothes Deborah had outgrown, shared coffee at 6 a.m. when neither of us had slept. "You're doing better than you think," Amanda told me once, observing me struggle to get Deborah to eat anything besides crackers. "I'm barely holding it together," I admitted. "That's what doing better looks like when you're doing it alone," she said. "Give yourself some credit." But credit didn't pay bills. It didn't ease the panic I felt every time an unexpected expense appeared. The car repair I couldn't afford. The pediatrician visit that insurance didn't cover. The daycare deposit that took 3 months to save for. Money was always tight. Not devastating, but the kind of tight where you count every dollar and hold your breath until payday. Some nights, after Deborah finally fell asleep, I'd sit on the kitchen floor and cry. Not because I regretted her, never that, but because the weight of doing everything alone sometimes felt like it would crush me. But despite the exhaustion, despite the fear, despite the loneliness that sometimes felt like a physical presence in the room, Deborah thrived. She learned to crawl at 7 months, pulling herself across the living room floor with determination that reminded me so much of Michael it hurt. Her first word was, "Mama," and I cried for an hour. By her second birthday, she was talking in full sentences, asking questions about everything. Why is the sky blue? Where do birds sleep? Why don't we have a daddy? That last question nearly broke me. Some families look different, I told her, keeping my voice steady. And ours is just you and me. And that's perfect. She accepted it the way children accept most things, with curiosity but not judgment. But I saw Michael in her every single day. The way she furrowed her brow when concentrating. The stubborn set of her jaw when she'd decided something. Those eyes, dark and searching and impossibly intelligent for someone so small. I became an expert at avoidance. I stopped reading business news. Unfollowed any social media accounts that might mention Michael's name. Changed the channel if Ralph Industries came up. Walked past magazine stands without looking at the covers. It was exhausting, trying to live in a world where Michael Ralph existed publicly while pretending he didn't exist to me at all. Struggling doesn't mean you're failing. It means you're human. It means you're carrying more than one person should have to carry. If you're raising children alone, or if you've ever felt like you were drowning while everyone else assumed you were swimming, you made it through. And that matters. But then something happened that reminded me how small my world had really become. Deborah was 2.5 when she got a high fever that wouldn't break. I took her to urgent care, terrified, only to be told it was a simple ear infection. But the bill that arrived 2 weeks later wasn't simple. $840 that I didn't have. I called my mother, something I hadn't done in months. "I can't help you, Naomi," she said, her voice tight with disapproval. "You made your choices. You're the one who moved away, who cut everyone off. You're the one who—" I hung up before she could finish. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the bill, doing math that refused to work. Deborah was sleeping peacefully, her fever finally broken, completely unaware that her mother was breaking apart in the next room. Ella showed up at my door at midnight. I'd sent her a single text. "I can't do this anymore." She didn't ask questions. She just handed me an envelope with $900 cash inside. "Don't argue," she said when I tried to protest. "You do the same for me. I can't pay you back. I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you to let someone help you for once in your stubborn life." I cried into her shoulder for 20 minutes. That moment taught me something. Pride is expensive. And sometimes surviving means letting people see you fall apart. There's a moment in every hard season where you realize you can't do it alone anymore. Where asking for help stops being weakness and starts being wisdom. If you've had that moment, if someone caught you when you fell, you understand why we need each other. By the time Deborah turned 3, I'd almost convinced myself that I'd made it, that we'd escaped. Michael had moved on, I was certain. Men like him always did. He'd probably met someone more suitable. Someone whose life fit into his world instead of requiring him to rearrange it. I imagined him at charity galas with a woman who understood corporate dinners and investor meetings. I pictured him happy, successful, unencumbered by the family he'd said he wasn't ready for. And I told myself I was fine with that. That this was exactly what I'd wanted when I made my choice. Ellis disagreed. "You can't hide forever, Naomi," she said one evening when Deborah was napping. "Eventually something's going to give." "I'm not hiding," I argued. "I'm just living differently." "You're living scared," she countered, not unkindly. "And Deborah's going to notice eventually." But I wasn't ready to hear that, because admitting I was scared meant admitting I might be wrong, and I couldn't afford to be wrong. Not when my daughter's entire life was built on the foundation of my choice. So I kept going, kept working, kept parenting, kept pretending that Michael Ralph was just a name I used to know instead of the father of my child. The charity gala invitation arrived on a Tuesday in April. My boss handed it to me like it was routine. "Healthcare Innovation Gala," she said. "The company bought a table. You're representing our department. Non-negotiable, sorry." I looked at the invitation. Heavy cardstock, gold lettering. And there, listed as keynote speaker, Michael Ralph, CEO, Ralph Industries. My hands started shaking. "You okay?" my boss asked. "Fine," I lied. I haven't been to something like this in a while." She smiled. "Well, dress nice. It's big deal. Michael Ralph doesn't usually do these things." I nodded mechanically, already calculating how I could get out of it. Fake sick, car trouble, family emergency. But I knew I couldn't. This was work. This was required. This was fate refusing to let me hide anymore. That night, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, staring at my reflection while Deborah slept in the next room. 3 years. I'd managed to avoid him for 3 years. And now I was going to be in the same room, breathing the same air, close enough to see if time had changed him the way it had changed me. I threw the invitation in the trash, then pulled it out again, then put it on the fridge where I'd see it every morning and remember, you can't outrun the truth forever. The next 2 weeks felt like waiting for a collision I could see coming but couldn't prevent. Every time I glanced at that invitation on my fridge, my stomach dropped. Every time Deborah asked why I seemed distracted, I had to swallow the truth and smile instead. I thought about backing out 100 different ways. Food poisoning, migraine, sudden family emergency 3 hours away. But my boss had made it clear, this wasn't optional. Our company's biggest client would be there, and I was expected to represent us professionally. So I did what I'd learned to do over the past 3 years. I prepared. Ellis came over the night before to watch Deborah while I tried on the one formal dress I owned, a simple navy blue sheath that I'd bought for a wedding 2 years ago and hadn't worn since. "You look beautiful," Ellis said, adjusting the neckline. "But you look terrified." "I am terrified," I admitted, staring at myself in the mirror. "What if he sees me and just knows?" "Knows what? That you had his baby and disappeared for 3 years?" Ellis raised an eyebrow. "Naomi, he's going to be surrounded by hundreds of people. You'll probably be across the room the entire night." But I could feel it in my bones. This wasn't going to be that simple. Have you ever walked into a situation knowing it could change everything? Where your heart is screaming at you to run, but your feet keep moving forward anyway? That's what courage actually looks like. Not fearlessness, just fear with forward motion. The night of the gala arrived with unseasonably warm weather and my anxiety at an all-time high. I kissed Deborah goodbye, breathing in her baby shampoo smell like it could fortify me. She was almost asleep already, her small hand wrapped around her stuffed rabbit. "Love you, baby girl," I whispered. "Love you, mama," she mumbled, eyes already closing. I drove to the Grandview Hotel with sweaty palms and a racing heart. The parking lot was full of luxury cars that cost more than I'd made in the past 2 years. I felt immediately out of place. The ballroom was exactly what I expected. Crystal chandeliers, white tablecloths, women in designer gowns, men in tuxedos that actually fit. Soft jazz played from somewhere. Waiters circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres that were too small to actually satisfy hunger. I found my company's table and sat down, introducing myself to colleagues I'd only met over email. I smiled, made polite conversation, pretended my entire body wasn't vibrating with tension. And then I saw him. Michael was across the ballroom, talking to a group of men in expensive suits. He looked older, not in a bad way, just more refined. His hair had a touch of gray at the temples that hadn't been there before. He'd filled out slightly, looked more solid, more grounded. But it was still him. Still the man whose face I'd memorized. Still the father of my child who didn't know he was a father. I turned away quickly, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure everyone could hear it. "You okay?" the woman next to me asked. "Fine," I lied. "Just warm in here." I made it through dinner by avoiding looking in his direction. Made it through the speeches by focusing on my water glass. Made it through the award presentations by counting ceiling tiles. And then, during the networking portion of the evening, fate made its move. "Naomi?" His voice. That same voice that used to say my name like a question and an answer simultaneously. I turned slowly, and there he was, 5 feet away. Close enough that I could see his eyes widen slightly with recognition. "Michael?" I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Hi." This is the moment I'd been dreading for 3 years. Pretending you're fine when you're absolutely falling apart inside, if you've ever smiled through panic. You know what this cost me. Secrets sit right behind your teeth during conversations like this. They make every word feel like betrayal or protection, sometimes both at once. I didn't expect to see you here, he said, and something in his expression looked almost relieved. How have you been? Good, I said automatically. You? Busy. A small smile. But good. It's been, 3 years? About that, I said, taking a sip of water to buy myself time. Silence stretched between us, not quite uncomfortable, but weighted with everything we weren't saying. You look well, Michael said finally. Really well. So do you. God, we sounded like strangers, polite strangers making small talk at a corporate event. Not two people who'd once planned a future together. Not two people who'd grieved a loss that never actually happened. Are you still doing medical billing? He asked. He remembered. Of course he remembered. Yes, remote work. It's been good for me. Good for hiding, I didn't say. That's great. I'm glad you found something stable. He paused, and I saw him wrestling with something. Naomi, I've thought about you over the years. Wondered if you were okay, if you'd moved on. The irony of that question nearly broke me. I have, I said softly. Life looks different now, but it's good. We talked for a few more minutes, surface-level conversation about work, the city, mutual acquaintances. I was about to excuse myself, about to escape with my secret still intact, when he said something that stopped my heart. I'm actually doing something new, Michael said, a strange vulnerability crossing his face. Something I never thought I'd do. Oh? He glanced around, then leaned in slightly like he was sharing something important. I'm in the process of adopting. Well, sponsoring and planning to adopt. A baby girl. The room tilted. A baby, I managed to say. Through a foundation Ralph Industries supports, he continued, clearly wanting to talk about it. We fund maternal health programs, support systems for young mothers. A few months ago there was a case. A baby abandoned at a hospital. No family, no one to claim her, and I couldn't stop thinking about her. My hands started trembling. I hid them behind my back. That's wonderful, Michael. This is the moment where everything I thought I understood shattered. Where I realized the man I'd been protecting my daughter from was desperate to be a father. Just not to his own child. If your heart is breaking right now, if you're feeling the unfairness of timing, you understand what this cost me. I've been buying things, he said, a self-conscious smile crossing his face. Baby clothes, blankets, toys. I know it sounds strange, but it feels right. Like this is what I'm supposed to be doing. The baby aisle, the pink sweater, the soft blankets. They weren't for another woman. They weren't for a life that had moved on without me. They were for a child who needed a father, while his own daughter slept in a crib 3 hours away, completely unaware she had one. When did you... I had to clear my throat. When did you decide this? Honestly, I've been thinking about it for a while, ever since... He stopped himself, pain flickering across his face. Ever since we lost our baby, I've been thinking about what kind of father I might have been, if I'd been ready, if I'd been brave enough. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab him by the shoulders and tell him he was a father, that he had a daughter with his eyes and his stubborn determination. That bravery wasn't the issue, timing was. But I said nothing. The adoption process takes time, Michael continued, not noticing my internal collapse. But I'm committed. I want to give her the life she deserves. Be the father I should have been ready to be 3 years ago. You'll be a good father, I heard myself say, and I meant it. She's lucky to have you. Thank you, Naomi. That means a lot coming from you. Someone called his name from across the room, a board member needing his attention. Michael excused himself with an apologetic smile, touching my arm briefly before walking away. The moment he was gone, I grabbed the edge of the nearest table to steady myself. Michael Ralph was preparing to be a father. Just not to his own daughter. And I was the only person in the world who knew the devastating irony of that truth. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Michael's face when he talked about adoption. That soft, hopeful expression. The way he said he wanted to be the father he should have been ready to be 3 years ago. I kept my phone face down on the nightstand, terrified it would ring with his number. Terrified he'd somehow connected the dots between then and now. But morning came with only Deborah's usual 6 a.m. wake-up cry. I lifted her from the crib, kissed her forehead, and tried to pretend my world wasn't tilting on its axis. "Mama sad?" she asked, her small hand touching my cheek. "No, baby," I lied. "Mama's just tired." But the truth was eating me alive. Guilt is a specific kind of weight. It doesn't announce itself loudly. It just sits on your chest at 3 a.m., asking questions you don't have good answers for. If you've ever made a choice that seemed right at the time but haunts you later, if you've ever wondered whether protection and betrayal can be the same thing, you're not alone in carrying that. For the next 3 days, I functioned on autopilot. Work, Deborah, sleep, repeat. I avoided Ellis's concerned phone calls. Declined Amanda's invitation for coffee. I just needed time to think, to figure out what to do with the knowledge that Michael wanted to be a father while his own daughter played with blocks 3 hours away, completely unaware. Then Thursday morning arrived with a fever that changed everything. Deborah woke up burning hot, her small body radiating heat that scared me immediately. I pressed my lips to her forehead. 3.8 degrees, according to the thermometer. "It's okay, sweetheart," I murmured, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. "We're going to get you checked out." I called the pediatrician, but they were fully booked. "If she's that high, you should take her to Riverside General," the nurse advised. "They have an excellent pediatric unit." Riverside General. I'd driven past it 100 times but never been inside. I should have asked which hospital. I should have done research. But when your child is sick, you don't think about anything except making them better. The pediatric emergency room was surprisingly beautiful. Walls painted with murals of forests and animals, soft lighting, child-sized furniture in the waiting area. They took us back quickly when they saw Deborah's temperature. The doctor was kind, thorough, checked her ears, throat, listened to her lungs. "Looks like a viral infection," she said gently. "We'll run some tests, get her fever down, monitor her for a few hours. She's going to be fine." I exhaled for the first time in an hour. They moved us to a private room in the pediatric wing, a space clearly designed to be less scary for children. The walls had painted butterflies. The IV stand looked like a tree. Small mercies. Deborah fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted from crying. I sat in the chair beside her bed, holding her small hand, watching her chest rise and fall. That's when I noticed the plaque on the wall. The Ralph Foundation Pediatric Care Center. My blood turned to ice. No. No, no, no. I stood up, walked closer, read the words again, hoping I'd misunderstood. Generously funded by Ralph Industries and the Ralph Foundation, Michael's Foundation. Michael's money. Michael's name on the wall of the hospital where his daughter was currently sleeping. You ever notice how the universe has a sense of humor about the things you're running from? How it backs you into corners you swore you'd never end up in? Sometimes the truth doesn't wait for you to be ready. It just shows up and demands to be seen. My hands started shaking. I pulled out my phone, searched Ralph Foundation Riverside General. Article after article appeared. Michael had donated millions to build this wing 5 years ago. He served on the hospital board. He attended fundraisers here. This was his territory. And I'd brought our daughter right into it. I was halfway through planning our escape. We'd leave as soon as the doctor cleared us, find a different hospital, move cities if necessary, when the door opened. And Michael Ralph walked in. He was wearing business casual, slacks, button-down shirt, no tie. He had a tablet in his hand and was mid-conversation with a woman in a white coat who appeared to be a hospital administrator. And if we can expand the program to include... Michael stopped mid-sentence. He'd seen me. For 3 seconds, neither of us moved. The administrator kept talking, oblivious to the sudden shift in the room's atmosphere. "Naomi," Michael said, his voice confused. "What are you..." And then his eyes moved past me, to the hospital bed, to Deborah. I watched his face as he looked at her. Watched the confusion shift to curiosity. Watched curiosity shift to something deeper. Deborah was asleep, her dark curls spread across the pillow, one small fist curled near her face. The hospital gown was too big on her small frame. Her cheeks were flushed from fever. She looked exactly like his baby photos. I'd seen them once, years ago, when his mother had shown me a photo album. The resemblance was unmistakable if you knew what to look for. And Michael was looking. "This is your daughter?" he asked quietly, dismissing the administrator with a subtle gesture. She left, closing the door behind her. I couldn't speak. Could barely breathe. Michael took a step closer to the bed. Then another. He moved slowly, like he was approaching something fragile and precious. "How old is she?" His voice was barely above a whisper. "3, I managed to say. She just turned 3. I watched him do the math. Watched the calculation happen behind his eyes. 3 years ago. 3 years since we'd been together. 3 years since the miscarriage that wasn't. There are moments in life that move in slow motion, where you can see the realization forming, the truth crystallizing, and you're powerless to stop it. What's about to happen is what happens when lies of protection meet truth that refuses to stay buried. Michael leaned closer, studying Deborah's face with an intensity that made my chest tighten. I could see him cataloging features, the shape of her nose, the set of her jaw, the curve of her eyebrows, his eyebrows. "What's her name?" he asked, not looking away from her. "Deborah." He reached out slowly, carefully, and touched one of her curls. Just the lightest touch, like he was afraid she might disappear if he pressed too hard. Deborah shifted slightly in her sleep, turning her face toward his hand, and opened her eyes. Those eyes. Dark brown. Intelligent. Unmistakably his eyes looking up at him for the first time. Michael's breath caught audibly. Deborah blinked sleepily, confused by the stranger hovering over her bed. "Mama?" "I'm here, baby," I said quickly, moving to her other side. This is Michael, he's..." I didn't know how to finish that sentence, but I didn't have to. Michael was staring at Deborah, and Deborah, even through her fever-induced haze, was staring back. She tilted her head slightly, the same gesture Michael made when he was thinking, and asked, "Who you?" Michael's voice cracked. He cleared his throat, tried again. "I'm a friend of your mother's." But his hands were shaking, and his eyes had filled with tears he was clearly trying to control. He looked at me then. Really looked at me. And I saw the exact moment when possibility became certainty. "Naomi," he said, my name barely audible. "When you said you lost the baby..." "The doctors were wrong," I whispered. "They missed her. She survived. 3 years ago." "Yes." "And you didn't..." He stopped himself, looked back at Deborah, then at me again. "You didn't tell me." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact that felt like an accusation and a wound simultaneously. Deborah was observing us both now. Her small face confused by the tension she could feel but not understand. Michael moved around the bed slowly, stood directly in front of me. His eyes were wet, his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle jumping. "She's mine," he whispered. Not a question. A truth he'd just recognized. A daughter he'd just met. A future that had existed for 3 years without him knowing. I nodded, tears finally falling. "Yes," I said, my voice breaking. "She's yours." The silence in that hospital room was deafening. Michael stared at me, then at Deborah, then back at me. His chest was rising and falling rapidly, like he'd just run a marathon. His hands opened and closed at his sides, a gesture I recognized from years ago when he was trying to process something that didn't fit into his carefully organized world. 3 years, he said finally, his voice hollow. "I've had a daughter for 3 years." Deborah, sensing the tension even through her fever, reached for me. "Mama up." I lifted her carefully, mindful of the IV in her small hand. She buried her face in my neck, and I felt her hot breath against my skin. Michael watched us, and something in his expression cracked. "I need to understand," he said quietly. "I need you to help me understand how this happened. Because right now, Naomi, I feel like the ground just disappeared beneath me. This is the part where I have to be completely honest, where I have to defend a choice that maybe can't be defended. Sometimes the only thing worse than keeping a secret is finally having to reveal why you kept it." "Can we sit?" I asked, my legs suddenly unsteady. Michael pulled 2 chairs close together. I sat with Deborah in my lap. Her small body curled against mine. He sat across from us, leaning forward, hands clasped between his knees. And I told him everything. The hospital visit 3 years ago. The miscarriage diagnosis. The grief we shared. The way we fell apart afterward. How I went to a different doctor 3 weeks later and discovered the first doctor had been wrong. That our baby, our daughter, was still there. Still fighting. Still alive. "Why didn't you call me?" Michael asked, his voice breaking. "The moment you found out, why didn't you—" "Because you weren't ready," I said, tears streaming down my face. "Michael, when I first told you I was pregnant, you said, 'Not now.' You said you couldn't be a father, that the timing was wrong, that you had too much on your plate." "I was scared," he said. "I was terrified and stupid, and when you thought we lost her, you were relieved," I continued, the words I'd been holding for 3 years finally spilling out. "Don't lie to yourself. Part of you was relieved. I saw it in your eyes. The guilt, yes. But also the relief that you didn't have to choose between your empire and your family." Michael flinched like I'd struck him, but he didn't deny it. "So you decided I didn't deserve to know?" Michael asked, his voice barely controlled. "I decided she didn't deserve to be a burden," I said fiercely. "I decided she didn't deserve to grow up feeling like she arrived at the wrong time, like she was an obligation that derailed someone's dreams. That's not fair, isn't it?" I looked at him directly. "Michael, you were building Ralph Industries. Every conversation we had for 2 years revolved around investors, mergers, board meetings, competition. Your life was public, scrutinized, every decision analyzed, every relationship questioned." I held Deborah tighter. I couldn't bring her into that. I couldn't make her compete with an empire for her father's attention. "You didn't give me a choice," Michael said, his voice cracking. "You decided for both of us." "Yes," I admitted. "I did. And maybe that makes me cruel. Maybe that makes me wrong. But I did it because I loved you both too much to watch you resent each other." Silence filled the space between us. Deborah stirred in my arms, whimpering softly. Michael's eyes immediately went to her, concern replacing anger. "Is she okay?" he asked. "Fever's breaking," I said. "She'll be fine." He nodded, his jaw working as he tried to control his emotions. Then, suddenly, he stood up and walked to the window, his back to us. His shoulders were shaking. Michael Ralph, billionaire, CEO, the man who commanded boardrooms and made million-dollar decisions without flinching, was crying. "I missed everything," he said, his voice muffled. "Her birth, her first word, her first steps, 3 years of her life. 3 years I can never get back." "I know," I whispered. "I'm sorry." "I wanted to be a father," he continued, turning back to face us. His face was wet, his eyes red. "These past few months, planning the adoption, buying things for that little girl, it wasn't about charity, Naomi. It was about trying to become the man I should have been ready to be when you needed me." His words hit me like a physical blow. This is what regret actually looks like, not anger, not blame. Just grief for the time lost and the choices that can't be unmade. If you've ever watched someone realize what they missed, or if you've been that person realizing, you know this pain cuts deeper than any accusation could. "Can I?" Michael's voice broke. He cleared his throat, tried again. "Can I hold her, please?" I looked down at Deborah. She was more alert now, observing Michael with curious eyes. "There's someone who wants to meet you properly," I said softly to her. "Is that okay?" She studied Michael for a long moment, then nodded. I stood and carefully transferred her to Michael's arms. He held her like she was made of glass, supporting her head, adjusting her hospital gown so the IV line wouldn't pull. Deborah looked up at him, tilting her head in that gesture they both shared. "Hi," she said quietly. "Hi, Deborah," Michael whispered, and fresh tears spilled down his face. His voice failed him. "You look sad," Deborah observed, with the blunt honesty of a 3-year-old. "I'm not sad," Michael said, smiling through tears. "I'm happy. So happy to meet you." They sat like that for several minutes, Michael holding Deborah studying his face with open curiosity. She reached up and touched his cheek where tears had tracked. "Why you crying?" she asked. "Because I'm meeting someone very special," Michael said. "Someone I should have met a long time ago." I watched them together. The physical resemblance undeniable now that they were side by side. Same eyes, same expressions, same mannerisms I'd noticed in Deborah, but tried not to acknowledge. "Naomi," Michael said finally, not looking away from Deborah. "I need to say something." I braced myself for anger, for accusations, for demands about custody and rights and lawyers. "I failed you," Michael said quietly. "When you told me you were pregnant, I failed you. I chose fear over faith, work over love. And I've regretted that every single day since." He finally looked at me, still holding Deborah carefully. "You made a choice I don't agree with. You kept her from me, and that hurts in ways I can't even articulate yet. But I also understand why." His voice was steady now, measured. "I wasn't ready. You were right about that, and you protected her from my inability to be what she needed." He looked down at Deborah, who was starting to fall asleep against his chest. "I can't change the past 3 years. I can't get that time back. But if you'll let me, if you both will let me, I'd like to be part of what comes next." "Michael, I'm not demanding," he clarified quickly. I'm asking if there's space in her life for me, if there's a way I can earn the title I should have had from the beginning." The transformation was complete. The man who'd said "not now" 3 years ago was asking, begging for please now. "She needs consistency," I said finally. "Not a father who shows up when work allows. I know. She needs someone who chooses her, every time. I understand. She needs—" "I'll be whatever she needs," Michael interrupted, his voice fierce with conviction. "Whatever that looks like, however long it takes. I'm here, Naomi. I'm finally here." Deborah's small hand curled around Michael's finger as she drifted to sleep. And watching them together, my past and my present finally meeting, I allowed myself to hope that maybe, just maybe, some broken things could be healed after all. The day after the hospital, Michael showed up at my apartment at 7 a.m. with coffee and a stuffed elephant that was almost as big as Deborah. "Too early?" he asked when I opened the door, clearly exhausted. "She's been up since 5, I said, stepping aside to let him in. "You're right on time for chaos." Deborah peeked around the corner, her fever gone but her energy cautious. She remembered him, the man from the hospital who'd held her and cried. "Hi, Deborah," Michael said, kneeling down to her level. "I brought you a friend." She approached slowly, eyeing the elephant. Then she grabbed it, dragged it to the couch, and climbed on top of it like it was a throne. Michael glanced at me with an expression of pure wonder. "Is that normal?" "That's Deborah," I said with a small smile. "Welcome to fatherhood." The first week was awkward. Michael came over every morning before work and every evening after. He'd sit on the floor with Deborah, building block towers she'd immediately destroy, reading picture books with voices he was terrible at, asking me 100 questions about routines and preferences and what the weird rash on her arm meant. "Is this normal?" became his most used phrase. "She's 3, I'd respond. "Everything and nothing is normal." But he was trying. God, he was trying so hard. I observed him struggle with basic things. How to hold a sippy cup at the right angle so she wouldn't spill. How to negotiate with a toddler who'd decided pants were optional. How to interpret the 17 different types of crying that all sounded identical to an untrained ear. One night he called me at 11 p.m., panic in his voice. "She won't stop crying," he said. I could hear Deborah wailing in the background. "I've tried everything, food, water, toys, that stuffed elephant, nothing's working." "Where are you?" I asked, already grabbing my keys. My apartment. I thought, I wanted to give you a break, have her stay over. But this was a mistake. I'm in over my head. I arrived 20 minutes later to find Michael pacing his penthouse living room with a screaming Deborah, looking more rattled than I'd ever seen him in a boardroom. Give her to me, I said gently. The moment Deborah was in my arms, she quieted slightly. I felt her forehead, warm but not feverish. Checked her diaper. Fine. Then I noticed the tag of her pajamas sticking out, scratching against her neck. It's the tag, I said, carefully removing it with scissors from my purse. She hates tags. Always has. Within minutes, Deborah was calm, sucking her thumb, half asleep against my shoulder. Michael stared at us with something like awe and devastation combined. How did you know that? 3 years of trial and error, I said softly. You'll learn too. Parenthood isn't instinct. It's 1,000 small observations built over sleepless nights and panicked moments. It's learning that this cry means hungry and that one means tired. If you're a parent who remembers feeling completely lost in those early days, you're not alone, and neither is Michael. But Michael didn't just learn the mechanics of parenting. He rearranged his entire life around her. The first sign was the board meeting he rescheduled because it conflicted with Deborah's speech therapy assessment. His assistant called me, confused, asking if I'd requested it. I didn't, I told Michael later. You don't have to. Yes, I do, he interrupted. She had an appointment. I wanted to be there. The second sign was the day I found him in the pediatrician's waiting room, suit jacket off, tie loosened, reading a parenting book titled Understanding Your Toddler's Emotional World. Recommended reading? I asked, sitting beside him. Research, he said seriously. If I'm going to do this, I'm doing it right. The third sign came 2 months in, when Ralph Industries announced a new co-CEO structure that would allow Michael to delegate more operational responsibilities. You didn't have to do that, I said when I saw the press release. I did, Michael said simply. I missed 3 years. I'm not missing anything else. This is what transformation actually looks like. Not dramatic declarations, just quiet choices made over and over. Meetings rescheduled, priorities reordered, empires restructured around what actually matters. But it wasn't all smooth. There were tensions. Arguments whispered after Deborah went to bed about boundaries and decisions, and whose turn it was to handle discipline. You can't just give her ice cream because she asked nicely, I said one evening after Michael had undermined my no dessert before dinner rule. I'm trying to bond with her, he defended. You bond by being consistent, not by being the fun parent who gives her whatever she wants. I'm not trying to be the fun parent. I'm just trying to be her parent. The silence after that statement felt heavy with everything we weren't saying. But beneath the logistics and the scheduling conflicts and the disagreements about screen time, something else was growing. I'd catch Michael observing me when he thought I wasn't looking. His eyes would hold questions he wasn't ready to ask yet. And I'd find myself noticing things. The way he was gentle with Deborah, even when exhausted. The way he remembered that she liked her sandwiches cut into triangles, not squares. The way he'd learned to French braid her hair by watching YouTube videos at midnight. One Sunday afternoon, I walked into the living room to find them asleep on the couch together. Deborah curled on Michael's chest, his arm wrapped protectively around her, both of them breathing in sync. My heart did something complicated in my chest. This was the family I'd imagined once, before fear convinced me it was impossible. Then the media found out. It started with a photo. Michael leaving my apartment building with Deborah in his arms, her face partially visible. Someone recognized him, posted it online with speculation. Billionaire CEO Michael Ralph spotted with mystery child. Within days, the story exploded. Gossip sites, business publications, social media threads dissecting every detail they could find. I panicked immediately. This was exactly what I'd feared. The scrutiny, the exposure. Deborah's face analyzed by strangers. But this time, something different happened. Michael showed up that night with his legal team and a crisis management specialist. We're getting ahead of this, he said, but not the way you think. Within 24 hours, Michael had filed injunctions against 3 publications for photographing a minor without consent. He'd threatened legal action against anyone who published Deborah's image, and he'd made it clear, publicly and through legal channels, that his daughter's privacy was non-negotiable. When your private life becomes public consumption, when strangers feel entitled to judge your family, how you respond defines everything. Michael could have used Deborah for PR. Instead, he weaponized his entire legal arsenal to protect her. That's not just love, that's commitment. The statement that went out 3 days later was brief and final. Michael Ralph confirms he is the father of 3-year-old Deborah Cohen. He and the child's mother, Naomi Cohen, are committed to co-parenting. Any publication of the child's image without consent will face immediate legal action. The family requests and will enforce privacy. Additionally, Ralph Industries announces the launch of a comprehensive privacy protection initiative for executives' children, effective immediately. The media frenzy lasted 5 days, then faded when Michael's legal threats proved serious and there were no more photos to publish. But during those 5 days, Michael never wavered. He fielded questions, deflected intrusions, hired security to ensure my apartment building remained private, made it abundantly clear that Deborah was off-limits. He also quietly contacted the adoption agency about the baby girl he'd been sponsoring, ensuring she was placed with a loving family through his foundation's enhanced support program. That thread finally tied. "You're handling this differently than I expected," I admitted one evening after Deborah was asleep. "What did you expect?" "I don't know. Distance, maybe. Resentment about the complications." Michael looked at me with an intensity that made my breath catch. "Naomi, she's not a complication. She's my daughter. And you?" He stopped himself, shook his head. "You did what you thought was right. I'm not going to punish either of you for my past failures." The space between us suddenly felt charged with everything we'd been carefully not saying. "You're staying," I said quietly. Not a question. "I'm staying," Michael confirmed. "For as long as she'll let me, for as long as you both will let me." And for the first time in 3 years, I let myself believe him. It started with a photograph that slipped through the cracks. A paparazzi had camped outside Deborah's preschool and captured her face clearly during pickup. The photo hit a tabloid website before Michael's legal team could intercept it. Michael Ralph's secret daughter, first clear photos. The article included speculation about me, about our relationship, about why I'd hidden her. It painted me as calculating, as a woman who'd trapped a billionaire, as someone who'd weaponized a child for money I'd never asked for. My phone exploded with messages. My boss called, concerned about media attention affecting the company. Strangers found my social media accounts I thought were private. And Deborah's preschool director called to say that 3 separate people had tried to gain entry claiming to be family friends. I was shaking when Michael arrived that evening. Not just angry, terrified. "This is what I was afraid of," I said the moment he walked in. "They're treating her like she's public property. They're inventing stories. They tried to get into her school, Michael. Her school." "I know. Legal isn't enough." The words came out sharp, edged with 3 years of fear finally finding a target. This is exactly what I was trying to protect her from. This invasion, this scrutiny. Everything I knew would happen is happening. "Naomi, I'm doing everything I can. It's not enough," I was yelling now, pacing my living room while Deborah slept, oblivious to the storm brewing around her. "Your world did this. Your fame, your money. Everything I knew would hurt her is hurting her." Silence crashed between us. "I'm coming over," Michael had said on the phone earlier. Now he stood in my apartment, his jaw set, his eyes stormy. "You're right," he said, his voice dangerously calm. "This is my fault. My world brought this into her life, but running from it won't protect her, Naomi. It'll just teach her that she's something to hide." "Don't you dare make this about my choices," I shot back, keeping my voice low so Deborah wouldn't hear. "I hid her because you weren't ready. Because your life is a circus, and now she's part of it whether she wants to be or not." "So what do you want me to do?" Michael asked, frustration finally breaking through his control. "Disappear? Pretend I'm not her father? Go back to the way things were? I want you to understand what you cost her by being who you are." The words hit him like a physical blow. I watched him absorb them, watched pain flash across his face. Every relationship has a moment where you either break completely or break open into something more honest. This was ours. And if you've ever said the cruel true thing, the thing you can't take back even if you wanted to, you know the silence that follows determines everything. You're right, Michael said quietly. Being my daughter comes with complications, with attention she didn't ask for, with a spotlight that will follow her whether I'm in her life or not now that people know she exists. He took a step closer. But here's what you need to understand, Naomi. I didn't choose this life for her. You did. The moment you decided not to tell me she existed, you made a choice that led directly to this moment. If I'd known from the beginning, I could have protected her privacy, built structures around her before the world knew her name. His voice wasn't raised, but every word landed with precision. Instead, she's 3 years old and she's a mystery, a secret revealed. And that makes her more interesting to people than if she'd just been my daughter from the start. I opened my mouth to argue, but the truth of his words stopped me. He wasn't wrong. So what do we do? I asked, my anger deflating into exhaustion. Michael ran his hand through his hair. That gesture I'd seen 1,000 times when he was wrestling with impossible problems. I'm pulling her out of that preschool tomorrow and enrolling her in a private program that has actual security, he said. I'm hiring a personal security detail, discreet, but present. And I'm suing that tabloid into bankruptcy as a warning to every other publication that my daughter is not content. He looked at me directly. I'm also stepping back from all public events for the next 2 years minimum. No galas, no keynote speeches, no magazine profiles. I'm becoming boring to the media, invisible, so they lose interest in me and, by extension, in her. Michael, you don't have to. Yes, I do, he interrupted. Because you were right about one thing. My world is dangerous for her. So I'm changing my world. The fight drained out of me completely, replaced by something that felt dangerously like hope. Why? I whispered. Why are you doing all of this? Michael took another step closer. We were inches apart now, close enough that I could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the determination, the fear that mirrored my own. Because 3 years ago I chose wrong, he said quietly. I chose ambition over you, work over family, fear over faith. And I lost everything that mattered. His voice dropped even lower. I'm not making that mistake again. I'm choosing her. I'm choosing... He stopped himself, swallowed hard. I'm choosing differently this time. This is what evolution looks like. Not the same love returning unchanged, but growth that happens in the space between breaking and healing. If you're watching this and thinking about your own second chances, the ones that worked because people actually changed, you understand why this moment matters. Michael, I said, my eyes filling with tears. I'm sorry I kept her from you. I'm sorry I made that choice alone. I thought I was protecting everyone, but I was just scared, he finished. You were scared, and I gave you every reason to be. We both made mistakes, I said. Yeah, he agreed. We did. The silence between us felt different now. Not empty. Full of everything we'd been too afraid to say. I don't know how to do this, I admitted. How to trust that you'll stay. That you won't wake up one day and realize this life is too complicated, too ordinary, too different from what you built. I'm not the same person I was 3 years ago, Michael said. That man would have run, would have found an excuse, would have chosen the empire. He reached up slowly, giving me time to pull away, and touched my face. This man is choosing you, both of you, every day, for as long as you'll let me. What if I hurt you again? I whispered. What if I make the wrong call? Then we'll deal with it together, he said simply. That's what partners do. Partners. The words settled into the space between us like a promise. Kiss me, I said. Michael's eyes widened slightly. Naomi, kiss me, I repeated. Not because of history, not because of Deborah, but because you want to. Because this is a choice, not an obligation. He studied my face for a long moment, searching for certainty I wasn't sure I could give. Then he kissed me. Not like the desperate kisses of our past. Not like people trying to fill voids or escape fear. This was intentional, gentle. A question and an answer and a promise all at once. When we pulled apart, both breathing unsteadily, I rested my forehead against his. "We're doing this differently this time," I said. "Slowly, honestly, with boundaries and conversations and therapy," Michael suggested with a small smile. "Definitely therapy," I agreed. "And Deborah comes first," he added. "Always. Always," I confirmed. We stood there in my living room, holding each other while Deborah slept in the next room and made a silent commitment. We were choosing truth over fear, honesty over hiding, each other over everything else, not because it would be easy, but because some things are worth fighting for. 18 months later, I woke up to the sound of laughter coming from the kitchen. Not crying, not arguments, not the tense silence of people trying too hard, just laughter. I pulled on my robe and padded down the hallway of the house. Michael, Deborah, and I now shared a home we'd chosen together 6 months ago after a year of careful, intentional rebuilding. It had a backyard where Deborah could play without cameras, a fence high enough for privacy, but not so high it felt like a fortress. A home, not a hiding place. In the kitchen, Michael was attempting to flip pancakes while Deborah sat on the counter, her legs swinging, directing him like a tiny foreman. "No, Daddy, not like that," she said with the confidence of a 4.5-year-old who believed she knew everything. "You gotta flip it higher." "Higher?" Michael asked, playing along. "Like this?" He flipped the pancake with exaggerated flair. It stuck to the ceiling. Deborah dissolved into giggles. Michael glanced up at the pancake, then at me in the doorway, then back at Deborah, and started laughing too. "We don't tell Mom about this, right?" he said conspiratorially. "Too late," I said, unable to keep the smile off my face. "Mama sees everything." This is what healing looks like. Not perfection, not the absence of mistakes, just pancakes on ceilings and laughter that comes easily. If you've made it through something that once felt impossible, if you've found your way back to joy after grief, this is your reminder that broken things can become beautiful. Michael had kept every promise he'd made that day in my apartment. The privacy initiative passed through Ralph Industries with unprecedented support. Media interest in Deborah faded when there was nothing scandalous to report. Just a father who showed up for school pickups, a mother who worked from home, and a child who lived a beautifully ordinary life. He'd restructured his role, delegating operations to trusted partners so he could be present. Not just physically present, but emotionally available. The kind of father who knew which books Deborah wanted read at bedtime, which foods she'd eat only if cut into specific shapes, which nightmares required extra cuddles. "You're staring," Michael said, pulling me from my thoughts. "Just observing," I corrected, accepting the coffee he handed me. And I'm happy," I said simply. Surprisingly, unexpectedly happy. He kissed my temple, a gesture that had become routine over the past months, but still made something warm bloom in my chest. Deborah's 4th birthday party had happened 2 months ago in our backyard. Small, intimate, exactly what we'd planned. Ellis came with her partner. Amanda brought her twins. A few kids from Deborah's new school ran around with balloons, while adults made conversation that didn't feel forced. Normal. Beautifully, impossibly normal. I'd observed Michael kneel beside Deborah as she opened presents, his hand steady on her back, his face lit with genuine delight at her excitement over a toy doctor's kit. "She has his whole face," Ellis had said beside me. "I know," I'd said. "I see him every time I look at her." "Does that still hurt?" I'd considered the question honestly. Not anymore. Now it just feels right, like she was always meant to carry pieces of both of us. We don't heal alone. We heal in community, with people who witness our struggle and celebrate our survival. If you have someone who's been there through your hardest seasons, someone who gets to celebrate the good parts because they stayed through the terrible parts, that person matters, and so does your story. That evening, after Deborah crashed early from excitement over her new toys, Michael and I cleaned up in comfortable silence. "I gave an interview last week," he said carefully, drying dishes while I washed. My hands stilled in the soapy water. "What kind of interview?" "Business publication." They asked about the privacy initiative, about being a father, about balancing work and family. He paused. I told them the truth. Which truth? That I have a daughter named Deborah. That her mother and I are building something I should have been brave enough to build years ago. That I'm not interested in making my family part of my brand. I'm interested in being a father who deserves his daughter's respect. He set down the dish towel and turned to face me. I also said that the 3 years I missed with her are my greatest regret. Not because I want sympathy, but because I want other men to understand what it costs to choose fear over fatherhood, to choose timing over truth. My throat tightened. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. Because our story might help someone else make a different choice, a braver one. Later that night, after Michael had tucked Deborah into bed, another routine that had become sacred, I sat in Deborah's room for a moment, observing her sleep. She was sprawled across her bed in that complete abandonment only children achieve, her doctor's kit on the nightstand, a small smile on her face. She had no idea how close she came to growing up without her father. No idea about the secret I'd carried or the fear that had driven every decision for 3 years. And maybe that was okay. Maybe she'd grow up with a different story. One where her father showed up late but stayed forever. Where her mother made a hard choice with good intentions. Where love arrived imperfectly but honestly. 3 years ago, I saw Michael in a baby store buying clothes for a child he didn't know was his. It felt like cruelty then. Like the universe mocking the choice I'd made. Now I understood it differently. Michael had been preparing to be a father the only way he knew how. By trying to save someone else's child because he couldn't save his own. Not because he didn't care, but because he didn't know there was someone to save. We'd both been broken in different ways, both trying to survive losses that weren't actually losses, both building walls when we should have been building bridges. And somehow, impossibly, we'd found our way back to each other. Not the way I'd imagined when I was 27 and naive about love, not the way fairy tales promised, but in a way that felt more solid because it was built on truth instead of illusion. Love doesn't look the same the second time around. It's less romantic, more intentional, less about butterflies, more about choosing each other on the hard days, less about perfect timing, more about perfect honesty. If you're in love, or trying to rebuild love, with someone who's seen you at your worst and stayed anyway, you understand why this matters. The last thought I had before falling asleep that night was about fate. I used to think fate was about perfect timing, about things aligning just right. Now I knew better. Fate wasn't about timing. It was about truth finally getting tired of being denied. About love that refused to stay buried even when you were convinced it was safer underground. Michael and I didn't get a second chance at our old love. We got a first chance at honest love. Love that knew what it cost. Love that chose deliberately. Love that arrived with eyes wide open and decided to stay anyway. And maybe that was better. Maybe love that survives secrets and separation, and 3 years of silence comes back stronger. Not in spite of the breaking, but because of what gets built in the space where broken things used to be. I walked into Deborah's room one last time that night, tucked her blanket tighter around her small shoulders, and whispered the truth I'd finally learned. Sometimes love doesn't come back the same. It comes back stronger because it finally arrives with truth.